It's my deep pleasure to introduce our speaker today. And I feel very honored to have been able to meet Sharon Solomon many years ago. I was about 26 years old when I met Sharon. I'm 68 now, so we've known each other a while. She's an old and dear friend of mine, very close to me. For those of you who don't know Sharon, Sharon Solomon is the wife of Paul Solomon, the founder of this church, of the Fellowship of the Inner Light. She's also a minister of the Fellowship of the Inner Light. And she has worked and volunteered for the church since the late 70s. Sometimes you will see her in front of the scenes. More often, she's behind the scenes. I think sometimes an unsung hero, because sometimes, through the years, people walk in and, well, I guess the fairies did this. And she's one of those people who would see a need, and if she could take care of it, she would, and still does, whether it's involving people, places, or things. And one of the things that I've noticed in Sharon through many, many years is she takes great delight when any one of us has a breakthrough or a healing, or shines our light in our own unique way, or uses our own unique skill or talent. She just gets so happy. She's like a little bubbly elf, jumping up and down. My friend's doing this, or Sarah did this, or Carol did that, and she speaks so well of people. And I appreciate that in this person who's going to speak today. And so I know she's going to be inspired. And we're here with our hearts and minds open, ready to hear your message today, Sharon. So come on up.
Yesterday, we had a memorial service for my dear friend Glenda Anderson. And I was thinking, remembering that last time I spoke here, I had asked her to time me and let me know when my time is up. And she was sitting in the audience and smiling at me, so I saw her put her hand like this, and I was really into my talk, and I thought she was waving, and I waved back. But Glenda, ultimately I realized what she was trying to tell me, because I'd asked her to do it in the first place. But Glenda has always been my supporter. She saw the best in me through the years. And even when I didn't do a very good job, she said I was wonderful. So Glenda, if you're here today, this is for you. I love you. So I've just come back from Japan by a trip sponsored by the Fellowship of the Inner Light in Japan, where there's an active fellowship center. We ordained 22 new fellowship ministers. All of the ministers had studied inner light consciousness for 2 years. After the 2 years of study, there is an advanced inner light consciousness residential program, which for the past 10 years has been conducted in Koyasan, a Buddhist city on top of a mountain founded 1,000 years ago by an enlightened being named Kobodais, also called Kukai. At the age of 30, Kukai sailed to China to study esoteric Buddhism. In the year 807, he returned to Japan and founded the Shingon sect of esoteric Buddhism. Kukai is called the founder of Japanese culture and is credited with many lasting innovations in the lives of the people. One of the most famous sayings of Kukai is, "You can become the Buddha in this very life." So we rode up the mountain in a cable car and stayed in an esoteric Buddhist temple on Mount Koya for the week-long residential Inner Light Consciousness program. The theme of the Inner Light Consciousness program is learning to receive guidance from God. One day is devoted to each of the 7 terraces to higher consciousness, the meditation technique introduced 45 years ago by Paul Solomon. and we talk about each of the terraces, and we wear the colors of the terraces of the day. The students learn to receive their own guidance, how to give readings for one another, and we give a trance reading for each of the students. This year, we introduced training for ordination, explaining the sacraments with the unique understanding given by Paul. When you perform a sacrament, Jesus has promised, "I will be there," Paul said. So the students perform sacraments with one another using whatever tools and methods we have at hand. Thus, for the ritual of baptism, which is leaving behind all blame and forgiving ourselves and others for past mistakes, and then being born to new life, instead of the baptism in the ocean as we do in Virginia Beach, we did our baptism ceremonies in the public bath of the Buddhist temple, and later in the public bath of a rather fancy hotel in Tokugawa. Since you get naked in the public baths, we had to show the men how to do their own baptisms. For communion, the claiming of Jesus' promise of all these things I do, you can do also, and greater things than these can you do, we use the Hebrew blessing, as you've seen at the fellowship. So as we transliterate the Hebrew characters into our alphabet, we transliterated the Roman characters of our alphabet into Japanese hiragana, and together repeated the Hebrew blessing of Baruch Atah Adonai. We demonstrated the baptism or dedication of children, releasing our children to God's care as Abraham released his son Isaac, using pillows as props. The last 3 times we had been in Japan, we had performed weddings. So after explaining the sacrament of marriage and its correspondence to the joining of the divine bride to the Christ, we asked 4 of the people who had been married by us to describe their experiences. For the sacrament of foot washing, in which the students tell one another of things in their personality and character they believe can be improved as they wash each other's feet, emulating the act of Jesus washing the feet of the apostles, I took the night off. There's one great advantage in not understanding the language. That is, even if there's conflict among the people, I don't know about it. Thus, all of my Japanese friends are the pictures of perfection. Before the sacrament of ordination, and besides the residential program, we did 2 other classes in ordination, weekend workshops for people who had completed inner light consciousness in previous years, the residential program and the 2-year study. So we held rehearsals in which each of the candidates first placed a list of their old habits they wished to perform, they wished to change in a brazier to be burned, turned into compost, a replication of the second terrace and of the baptism experience. The students stated a description of their new selves, including their individual personal ministry and their commitment to the fellowship as fellowship ministers. They had to repeat their affirmations until all of us were convinced by their words, the tone, and body language that they were convinced that their projection of their new selves was real. For the rehearsals, their statements were translated so that I could understand them and make suggestions. At the ordination themselves, each stood proudly with congruity of mind, body, and spirit before the altar we had magnetized together to state their purpose and begin their new life. At a true ordination, as Paul and others have seen, a light descends from heaven into the new minister, augmenting their connection with Source. And thus we visualize that light entering each new minister. As the head of filling, Hiromi Matsumoto, placed the stole, the mantle of responsibility, on each new minister, and I anointed them with oil to bless them to their new life of service. 6 of the people ordained will continue their training to become certified inner light consciousness teachers and practitioners. With them, we began a 9-month program in which, in our meditation each day, preferably 3 times a day when we have time, we climb the sacred mountain, adding 1 terrace a month. We are now completing the first month, where we have meditated only on the meadow. Next month, we will climb to the red terrace and continue 1 terrace each month up to the top of the mountain and into the temple. If you don't know about the terraces, you can come to the meditation before the Sunday service to hear a beautiful rendition of the terraces. And we'll also be given inner light consciousness classes and holding study groups beginning shortly at times to be announced. We hope a lot of you will come. We think it'll be very exciting. We gave classes this year throughout Japan. From Koyasan, we went to Osaka, to Nara, Tokyo, and Tokorozawa, northwest of Tokyo, where Mrs. Matsumoto, the head of filling, lives. In addition to ordination and teacher training classes, we did workshops in the Tao of Communication, Esoteric Tarot, and the Powerful Woman. I have been going to Japan now every year for 24 years now. Not every year, almost, periodically. Since 1993, when Paul and I were teaching in Japan for 3 months, just before he died. Hiromi Matsumoto and Keiko Iso, who now run Filling, both of whom speak English, have become like sisters to me. So going to Japan is like going home. We enjoy each other's company and laugh a lot together, particularly about peculiarities in language and pronunciation. I know only a few words of Japanese, and I have found that any attempt I make to say a word in Japanese draws laughter. They say it's because of my pronunciation, but when I asked how the word is really pronounced, the word invariably sounds to me just the same as I think I said it. So we traveled throughout Japan this year. We took the Shinkansen, the bullet train, from Tokyo to Osaka, a distance of 246 miles, which took just 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's a luxurious, comfortable ride with lots of legroom. On a clear day, you can see Mount Fuji for miles and miles. The shorter train rides are not as luxurious, but comfortable enough, although during rush hour, people are cramped together just like you would find in New York or any other metropolitan city. At the end of our time in Japan, the cherry blossoms were in bloom, and as you rode on the train, you could see groves of beautiful trees, and there were lots of oohs and ahs from us and many of the other people. The trains in Japan are a marvel, and if everyone in Virginia Beach had had the opportunity to experience how easy it is to get around by train when they go to almost every city and are so accessible, I think we would never have turned down that rapid transit option in the last election here in Virginia Beach. Each visit, the Japanese Fellowship scheduled several sightseeing trips for me. This year we went to a beautiful shrine on the Sea of Japan, a sea town where travelers came in ancient times from the Asian continent. One of Japan's most famous scenic views is there, a naturally formed geographic feature that is narrow and long with a total length of about 3.6 kilometers. Legend has it that the god who created Japan used a ladder as a means of traveling back and forth between heaven and earth. One day, this ladder fell and became this piece of ground. When we visited the shrine in this seaport, the head Shinto priest of the shrine was taking a walk and stopped to converse with us, a great blessing as we all saw it. The Japanese people talked for quite a while with him, and I just smiled and nodded. One of my favorite places is Nara, an ancient Japanese capital city where there is one of the largest Buddhist statues in Japan. On the streets, the deer walk with the people. We fed the deer, and they followed us, gently nudging our backs because they wanted more food. I especially love them. Near the end of my stay, we visited the temple of Sugasawa-san, the Buddhist monk who had studied with Paul in Virginia Beach during the Japanese seminary program in 1993. In his temple is an altar that holds the ashes of Paul Solomon, which I saw for the first time. It was near the anniversary of Paul's death, and Sugasawa-san sang a sutra in Paul's honor, and as we meditated with him. There's a place reserved for my ashes next to Paul's, which hopefully will not arrive until many years from now. Other than Virginia Beach, Japan has probably more fellowship members and inner light consciousness graduates than any place in the world. We are an interfaith fellowship, and no place exemplifies that better than Japan. The worship of the one God and the worship of the many gods. How can we resolve that paradox? We can gain an understanding from several of the Japanese myths. Paul Solomon said, "The gods are one." Dion Fortune, a master who lived in the early 1900s in England, said, "All the gods are one god, and all the goddesses are one goddess." And when we translate the Old Testament, we translate the beginning as God created the heaven and the earth. But that's not what it says. In Hebrew, it says, Bereshis bara Elohim, and that says, in the beginning, the gods, plural, the Elohim. There were 7 of them. They created the heavens and the earth. And it is said that the greatest gift brought by the Hebrew religion is the belief in monotheism, the belief in one God. One of the most sacred prayers of the Jewish religion is the Shema Yisrael. It is translated, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Now, people say that means there is one God, but that's not what it says. It says God is one. There's a big difference. One God, or God is one. The gods are one. God is one. We are one. One of the greatest goals of Paul Solomon's teachings was to show that the worship of the many gods and the worship of one God is the same worship. In ancient times, the Manu, the initiates, the teachers told stories to awaken primitive people to eternal truths. And stories run parallel throughout the world. How did the worship of the one God and worship of the many gods come about, and how can the paradox be resolved? Well, in the northern hemisphere, the people could see many features on the land. The grass, the trees, the rivers, how the crops grew during the different seasons, how the phases of the moons affected the growing of plants. And they thought, look at the beauty of nature. There are so many features. There must be many gods. We could see it in the land itself. And in the northern hemisphere, they believed in the many gods. The goddess who gives birth must rule, they said. In the south, people saw the stark desert landscape and only one feature prominent in the heavens. That radiant feature high above, ruling, dominating. And they equated it with God, and they said, there must be but one God. In Japan, there are many features throughout the land, as in the north, the northern hemisphere. There's grass, trees, flowers, rivers, mountains. But Japan is an island nation, and if you've ever seen the sun rise over the waters, you can see how the Japanese people saw a sun goddess. The many features of the land, coupled with the blaring glow of the sun dominating the landscape. The sun goddess, Amaterasu, meaning great divinity illuminating heaven, was born from the left eye of her father, Izanagi. The legends say she descended from heaven when the latter fell in the small waterfront town on the Sea of Japan. Her brother, Susanoo, is the god of the storm. Both Amaterasu and her other brother, the moon god, Tsukiyomi, were given great palaces, while their brother, Susanoo, the storm god, had no beautiful place to live. And as legend said, Susanoo, being very jealous in protest, created havoc by causing storms. This, of course, was his nature, but he kept destroying Amaterasu's palace. After several arguments and several destructions of her palace, Amaterasu got so frustrated that she decided she'd had enough, and so she locked herself in a cave. And when Amaterasu disappeared into her cave, the world was cast into total darkness. Evil spirits ran loose all over the world. The grass didn't come out in the spring, the flowers didn't bloom, and the rice crop didn't grow, nor did any other vegetation. Now, the most famous myth of the story of Amaterasu corresponds with the classic Greek myth of the abduction of Persephone. As the legend goes, and you're probably familiar with this one, Persephone and her mother Demeter were very close. They frolicked the fields every day. And as Persephone grew, she became very beautiful. And Hades fell in love with her, lured her into the underworld. When Demeter found out, she became so depressed that she allowed the crops to die. Zeus, the chief of the gods, worked out a deal with Hades. And in the spring, Persephone returns to Earth and lives there for 6 months, when again the flowers bloom and the crops grow. The legend of Amaterasu's stay in the cave tells the story a little bit differently, and I love how it's portrayed. Now, while Amaterasu was in the cave, no crops or flowers would grow on Earth. And all of the gods tried to lure Amaterasu out of the cave, talking to her, begging her, giving her reasons why she was needed, but she wouldn't come out. Finally, the gods decided they would just hold a party. And the goddess Uzami started to dance. Amaterasu heard the joyous noises above her cave and was lured to take a glimpse out into the sunlight. She saw Uzami dancing, and she peeked out a little more. There, the gods held out a mirror. In the mirror, Amaterasu saw a beautiful woman and asked, "Who is this beautiful woman?" "Come out and see," said the gods. When she saw herself, she didn't recognize herself. And here's where the stories and the mysteries converge. The mysteries, the myths, are stories to awaken us to who we are. They tell of events in our lives, if only we can recognize them and change in that discovery. Jesus Christ said, "Know ye not that ye are God's sons and daughters of the Most High?" Do you know who you are? When you look in the mirror, do you recognize the God in you, the beauty, the majesty of the God in you? Or do you, like Amaterasu, live in a cave and hide your beauty to yourself and others? Now, that God's self is not your body, but behind that body, beyond the experiential unit, there is a you that was there before you had a body. There was an intelligence that pre-existed your body, that decided on the color of your hair, your eyes, your abilities, your strengths, your inclinations, your opportunities, your purpose. The real you is God, born of God. Recognizing who you are as the force of enlightenment creates a new birth in you. The moment of new birth is the moment of changing your point of identity from result to cause. It is the moment when you no longer think of yourself as the result of your personality, your behavior, your job, your relationships, your actions. But now you identify rather with the cause of life. What will it take to lure you out of the cave? Can the joy of life cause you to see the real you? And when you see the real you, will you recognize what you see? It took others' recognition of the beauty of the goddess for Amaterasu to see herself in all her beauty. Perhaps we must see the beauty in others first for us to see the beauty of God in our gods and goddesses in ourselves. Paul Solomon said that all women are goddesses and all men are gods. The mirror, the reflection of God in each of us, is one of the sacred objects of Japanese Shinto. We must recognize who we are. Paul Solomon said the gods are one. Diane Fortune said all the gods are one God and all the goddesses are one goddess. Kobodai said you can become the Buddha in this very life. Is it possible that when Amaterasu looked in the sacred mirror of Shinto, that she heard the words of Jesus saying, "Know ye not that ye are God, daughter of the Most High"? Next time you look in the mirror, who will you see?